where they're going or what will happen to them. And I think that was a somber feeling of hoping they'll do well, but not knowing what's in their future.
Yeah, it's kind of a bittersweet.
Yeah.
Sort of where okay, we've made it this far, but we don't know what's going to happen from here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you felt good because they were at a safe point in the reception center. They had been evacuated, but at the same time, that was just the start of their journey.
I imagine they're being spread across Europe, and some of them are even coming to the U.S.
Yeah, there's quite a bit trying to get into the U.S. I know at the Mexican border, there's a lot of refugees, Ukrainian, in addition to South American and Central American, that are trying to get into the States, and it's a process, so I really feel for them.
And would that be true of any country that they went to? I mean, would they be just kind of stuck there until...
It's a little bit different for the country, right? Each country has a different process of how they process refugees. I think it's easier for the EU for them to kind of move along there, versus America seems to be a little more challenging, especially just logistically to get here.
Yeah, that involves planes and several-day trips and trains and all kinds of things to get here to begin with.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot more European countries that people are trying to stay in. And I think there's also an element of Ukrainians hoping that they don't have to relocate their entire lives, that it's more of a temporary situation. And, it's unfortunately looking less and less likely to be terminated in the immediate future.
And I think that's important to think about, too, is that this is their homeland. So they eventually want to go back home.
Yes, they're a very prideful group of people. I remember the first day that we crossed into Ukraine, when we passed that last border checkpoint into Ukraine, there was a gentleman, there's two gentlemen and their cat, and we picked them up. We said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're going back into Ukraine." And they were looking for a ride. And we said, "Okay, well, we're going here. We'll take you as far as we're going." And they hopped in with their cat, and we were asking them what they were doing coming back. They were older gentlemen, and they said they wanted to fight for their country. And so to see people coming back in to fight for their country is just such a humbling thing to see.
And I think it is humbling because when you read the stories that are coming out of Ukraine, there are a lot of civilians who have just picked up arms and decided that they're going to fight.
Yeah, and not just Ukrainian either. I think there's people from all different countries that I would meet that were there to fight, and they had no ties to Ukraine or the people they were next to, but they just wanted to help. And I specifically noted there was a lot of veterans from different countries that just joined forces. So you would have the Ukrainian troops, and then you'd have, a group of other people from different countries fighting alongside them, and that was just surprising to see.
The Ukrainians have a lot of support worldwide.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
They certainly have a lot of empathy from different countries, and they're very appreciative, but I think they also wish that we would be doing more, and a lot of volunteers from different countries also wish their countries were doing more, but they're doing what they can.
I think that everyone is doing what they can. I think it's one of those things where, rightfully so, every country is afraid to get into the conflict because Russia is unstable and they're threatening things that could lead into a way bigger problem than what we're seeing.
Correct. I think that's the theme here, is that people want to do more, but how much more can they do without the fear of escalation? And how do you balance that? And it's a tough decision, because if you do escalate, then, there's a strong belief in people on the ground and people across the globe that it will escalate to a world war, and we don't want that mass loss of life. We don't want that to happen, but at the same time, what we're seeing Russians doing is just so awful and genocidal that it's hard to not want to just, go in all guns a-blazing.
I have to even stop myself from thinking, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we doing more? And it's like, well, my rational side says, because we don't want this to turn into World War III. And my emotional side says, but why aren't we taking that risk?
Yeah.
And of course, for people who don't understand military, like me, I don't understand military. I mean, I don't understand wars.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't. I think that you only hear, 5% from the news of what's actually happening. And we joke that everyone's a foreign policy expert now. Everyone, has all these ideas of what to do, but it's so complex and, it's hard to know what the right decision is. I think, we hear in the States that, oh, we're sending this money and we're sending all these supplies. Well, that's great, but is it getting to them? How many stories did we hear over there on the ground that they have supplies in Poland, but it can't get in? It can't get to those hard-hit areas because we can't, as NATO or the U.S., we can't go into Ukraine. So we're relying on other people and other organizations to get these supplies in. And so there's just such a backlog of logistic transport.
And I think that's something that people don't understand here either. They don't understand that there's so much going on in the background that we don't see.
No, I think we see or we hear stories of some of the cities that are struggling, but what we don't really hear in the States is just those independent stories, those individuals that, you're in the van and they're telling you that they had to leave their grandma behind because she wouldn't leave, or they had to leave their animals because they can't cross the borders with them, or, they have no home to go to because they got bombed. And I think when we look at it in such a macro global picture, we really lose sight of just the humans that are impacted, the ones that have no idea if they're going to have a home, if they're going to have family to go back to. And I think if we hear more stories like that, maybe we would be a little more motivated to help out in other ways.
And we need to hear those stories because those are the ones that are truly heartbreaking.
And I think when we talk about war, you think of this, one country versus another country and the traditional warfare and, the battlefields, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing this kind of guerrilla grassroots warfare of Russians going in, and we have rules of engagement, right? We have the Geneva Convention. We have a normalcy of war, which sounds weird, but that is the case. And what we're seeing is that Russia is not playing by those rules. They're decimating cities. They're wiping out people, children, groups of people. Just yesterday, my team, I'm still on WhatsApp with them, told us about how in their city, they watched Russians just shoot up a playground and shoot up community buildings and just taking out the infrastructure of gas lines and electrical grids and water supply. And they're just starving people out. And it's just a horrible sight to see. And it's not your traditional warfare.
The odd thing is that while I was writing these episodes, the thing that I realized was that this has been going on for centuries between Russia and Ukraine and Poland and Ukraine. I mean, that it seems like Ukraine is sort of prized land because they have so many resources there. And it seems like everybody wants a piece of Ukraine. And the Ukrainians have just suffered over years and years and years from this kind of warfare where on one hand, Russia would say, oh, we want to be your friends. And at the same moment, they would be invading Kyiv.
Yeah, I don't think it's realistic to trust anything that they're saying.
Oh, no. I don't think so either.
Yeah, and, I think it's often seen as almost like an East versus West of, Russia not wanting to concede to those ideologies of Western culture, and Ukraine is right on the cusp of that, and so that's a big challenge.
What's your take on Zelensky?
I think he has done a tremendous job in uniting the Russian people and trying to save his country and doing anything he can. And the way he's utilized a lot of communication and social media platforms and storytelling has been a tremendous asset to his war. And I think that the world might not be as engaged or paying as much attention had it not been for his leadership style in messaging.
And I think that Ukraine has seen that in the past, where past leaders haven't done that. And these conflicts have been going on forever and ever, but I don't think that any other Ukrainian leader has actually come out like Zelensky and said, okay, we need help.
Yeah, I certainly don't think that they would be as able to battle with Russia and kind of hold court with them as much as they could without Zelensky really advocating for his country and really trying to get the world on his side. And he's done a tremendous job in that.
I've sort of really become attached to Zelensky. I thought, geez, if every country had a leader like that.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. We talked about this a little bit with some of the volunteers on the ground, just how different the war would be if different leaders were in charge. And that's something, even if we had a different American leader, how would we be responding as America? And that's just really highlights the importance of electing the right person and the right leader into the offices.
I think for a lot of people, Zelensky has come out as a hero and I think he's very brave. He's taking on a country that has been bullying his people for years and said, okay, we're just going to rally and we're going to do what we can. And it's worked. I mean, they've held out for, I think, way longer than a lot of people expected under the current circumstances.
Certainly, and I think there's a general acceptance that he's essentially fighting, democracy's war, and we owe a lot to him and the Ukrainian people for how they're standing up to a bully like Russia.
Do you think that Russia is intending on spreading farther? Do you think that they're going to attack more and try and progress into other countries that maybe aren't traditionally Soviet?
I think it would highly depend on the outcome of some of these battles that they're currently facing and fighting with Ukraine. But given the lack of progress in taking over some of these these cities, I would doubt that they would be doing any sort of ground combat with other countries at this point. So I don't really see them doing that right now, but it really depends on the outcome of some of those other battles.
That makes sense because, they're not making great progress in Ukraine.
No, I imagine they'll probably take Mariupol sometime soon. Just how they manage to really trap the people and starve them out, and it's an awful battle there. But I imagine they will have some wins, but I don't know. It depends on just how aggressive, Vladimir Putin wants to be.
He's an aggressive man without calling him a sociopath.
I think that it's, his circle of advisors don't really convey the current situation accurately, and everyone seems to be afraid of him, and he's not making the best decisions. But I also don't know what his advisors are saying to him. I think no one really wants to battle a crazy person.
And I think that that's a lot of it. There were some media reports that I read where the people of Russia are actually rallying for this war. And I'm not entirely sure that that's because they're not getting accurate information either. It's entirely possible because Russia's sort of known for propaganda and spreading false information. So I'm not sure that that's an accurate statement.
yeah, I'm sure when